Welcome to episode 4 of the series, The Resurrection of Kemetic Astrology. I'm Khema, husband, father, energy medicine therapist, and priest of the Rasakunti tradition of ancient Kemet. And on today's episode, we'll be going into the planetary chakra. As we said on a prior episode, the way that we approach the chakras will be a mix of tradition and also innovation to modern time, as this is also a tradition of Kemet and a tradition of Black ancestral cultures, to always make sure what you do and what you use fits the time and fits the needs of the people. So the first chakra we'll be going to will be called the Amenti root chakra. So in Kemet, Amenti has many definitions. Ancestors, west, or the direction of the western gate where death occurs or where you enter the Durat. It's also called the land of the ancestors. It also signifies creativity, fertility, and stability. As you know, in Greco-Roman astrology, Western astrology, that Saturn is not equated with any type of creativity or fertility. That is a major difference between the Black ancestral perspective, the Kemetic perspective of Saturn, as one of the principal enter or deities associated with planet Saturn is men. So Amenti, or Sebach, Amenti Chapet, is a name of Saturn. Another name of Saturn is Heru Kapet, meaning Heru, bull of heaven, or bull of the sky. And it's not just talking about the strength of the bull, it's also talking about the fertility of the bull. And this concept of the Ka, also being that Ka deals with destiny, is very important, because if you look into even the Vedic tradition and how Saturn is dealt with, Saturn also deals with destiny, or applying certain structures in order that deals with our path when we reincarnate. So as you can see, this creativity, this fertility, this stability of Amenti and the Amenti root chakra ties right into what the modern presentation of the root chakra signifies, right? Which is stability, security, and fear. But other emotions that are not popularly talked about regarding the root chakra is joy and pleasure. And these qualities, these emotions also align once again with the Kemetic African approach to the root chakra, right? We must always remember the concept in modern spirituality is to avoid pleasure and desire, that it is bad. But when you look deeper into certain alternative Indian philosophies, they will be very upfront about the root chakra being responsible, not just getting control of your passions and your pleasure, but also enjoying. So to further elaborate on the Kemetic approach to the Amenti root chakra is a very big one, which is the ancestors, right? Your security, your stability in this world is inseparable from the ancestors, inseparable from your relationship with the ancestors. Even the concept of destiny. You don't have a destiny that's not connected to your bloodline. They say in African philosophy, in Kemetic philosophy, you get your spirit from your father and you get your blood from your mother. And the spirit that you get from your father is a major dictator of what your destiny is. So the concepts in the root chakra of survival is showing that we cannot survive on this planet without our ancestors. And this is a very big thing for Black people and the African diaspora, because when we attach to the Judeo-Christian religions, when we attach to certain Western cultural philosophies, American philosophies, within it, it is already telling us to separate from our ancestors. So it automatically predisposes us to be insecure, to live in fear, to live in a very survival mentality. Is this not the experience of Black people, especially in America? This constant state of not knowing, right? This constant state of what we're going to do and how we're going to get it. The philosophy, the cultural impetus of capitalism, of American culture, automatically predisposes us to be insecure, at least until we reconnect with our ancestors. As we can see, even in the history of America, even in the history of the Western Hemisphere, we're talking about the Haitian Revolution. We're talking about all of the other so-called slave uprisings in which the people connected with their ancestors and their ancestral traditions and established stability and security for themselves. And of course, this creativity and fertility of the root chakra is connected to your ancestors and your bloodline, but it's not an individual thing. It's also the creativity and fertility of your community, right? Because your community is also a part of your root chakra, right? When black people watch TV and they see a black man get gunned down by the police or see a black woman is abducted, it affects all of us, right? So there is a certain racial memory, a certain ancestral and group dynamic to our root chakra. More so for us as communal people, but really for all races. All races of people have a ancestral communal dynamic that they are all sensing and feeling through that root chakra, right? And as I said, with the situation of violence and terrorism enacted on black people in America, those personal fears of survival are collective fears that we all fear. That when that mother knows that her son, her husband is going outside and they might not even return if they get pulled over, by the wrong police officer. So I bring this up because the approach to opening, and we're not going to get deep into opening and closing chakras and that concept here, is definitely geared towards more of a linear concept from the modern spiritual perspective. But if we stick with what they say and use it and say, hey, you have to open up your root chakra first. Well, black people collectively have a problem already with the root chakra. So when you go and do those meditations, or when you chant Lang, if you use the Hindu mantras or the Hindu Heka, we do not use it. If you chant Lang, understand you're going to have an issue with, balancing that chakra overall, because the cultural impetus is not being used. Even mantras are very cultural. It's one thing that they will not tell you. A mantra is not just something that you say. It has been imbued with lineage. It has been imbued with intentions. It has been imbued with culture. And a lot of these mantras that are being used have been imbued with the cultural perspective of the people who give it to you, or the guru who gives it to you, who energizes that mantra. Well, we're going to say his, it should be her, but there's no female gurus or sages in the centric, Indo-European or Eurocentric spiritual traditions. But the mantras that they give you is imbued with their own energy and own intention. And that is very important and could potentially be dangerous, as we'll talk about in another video, because mantras and meditations are not just something that is ethereal. It has a very earthly manifestation, and its general manifestation is in something called neuroplasticity in the brain, meaning certain meditations can tell your brain to lower the production of certain neurotransmitters, certain hormones. And these can affect you in a negative way, depending on who you are, depending on what your destiny is, depending on the bloodline that you come from. So within the root chakra, your sense of security and survival is very much tied to a collective experience. And that collective experience is mediated and given to you by the ancestors. And even the concept of us wanting to get money and secure our resources from a black ancestral perspective, from a Kemetic perspective, you cannot do that without your ancestors. Right? Even in my personal life, I have a personal story of meditating, this is years ago, and an ancestor telling me, hey, you need to go invest in this commodity. At the time, it was lumber. This is it's like 4 or 5 years ago. And I doubted what was said to me. I don't know if that was really an ancestor. I don't know if that, I don't know. About a week later, the price of lumber goes up. Wow. About a month after that, I couldn't get into the contract, and a lot of people couldn't get into the contract because lumber sales had increased. Here it is that an ancestor told me I could have secured my survival, and I doubted it and lost out on that money. And of course, in America, what I just said might sound weird to somebody. An ancestor told you to invest? No, the ancestors are not involved in capitalism. We're ancestors in heaven. They don't deal with earthly reality, not according to black ancestral traditions. We can't take the linear concepts we learn about spirituality from a Eurocentric perspective and then superimpose it on ours. No, an ancestor will tell you how to make money. It's in the ancestor's interest that you also make money. There are people coming after you, aren't they? These ancestors will be reborn, won't they? And having the proper resources so that they can go about securing their futures and living their destiny is very important. Let's move on to the Benu sacral chakra, or what some call the sex chakra, with the planet Venus. Right now, the planet Venus is an interesting planet in regard to how we approach it from a Kemetic and African perspective. When you see Venus in traditional astrology, the main keynote you get is this kind of sensuality, this what people call love, and this kind of softness and passiveness. And a Kemetic perspective you have a nurturing, you have a compassion, you definitely have the sexual aspect, the fertility aspect, but what you also have is the themes of resurrection and rebirth, which is itself connected to sex. And it's connected to sex in the sense of ancestors being reborn, or that's how you're reborn into the planet, but even spiritually, right? Because the sacral chakra or the Swadhisthana chakra is connected to self-esteem. Right. And even when you get into breaking down the word Swadhisthana from a Sanskrit perspective, sthana means seat. Swati is connected to a sword, it's connected to purification. So it's a purification of the seat or purification of the self. And a lot of that purification that happens can and occur through sex with the proper partner, with the proper rituals, the proper purification is one of the, they say in spiritual circles, the quickest way and easiest way to acquire power or to rebirth yourself, to regenerate yourself, if it is done properly, right? It's also the easiest way to destroy yourself, right? As that is one of the qualities that is not properly spoken about with the Swadhisthana chakra, with the Benu chakra, is this all destructiveness that can occur, right? And you're obviously going to see it more in men than you're going to see it in women, right? Where this constant obsession with sex destroys you, right? Destroys you physically, destroys you mentally, and essentially destroys you spiritually. So other qualities of the Benu chakra or the Swadhisthana chakra is pleasure, self-esteem, affection, and delusion. Self-esteem is very important from a Black ancestral perspective, right? Because your self-esteem is not just you as an individual, it's tied to your community. It's tied to your clan. It's tied to your nation. There's a national self-esteem, right, for every nation. Sometimes the conflicts, the competition between countries is merely just based on how that country feels about itself. So from a Kemetic perspective, you see Venus, the planet, associated a lot with what we call the Cognitere, Wuser, Ptah, Kinsu. All of these interroot, when you read the literature, specifically have a special interaction and engagement with Venus. Let's just use the Inter or the deity Wuser as an example. Wuser is called a god of the underworld, right? And his association with the planet Venus can be seen in the fact that Venus is exalted in the sign of Pisces. And Pisces, from a Kemetic perspective, is the underworld, is the duat, in which Wuser is called the king of the underworld. But of course, how the exaltation takes place, the expression of that exaltation, the details of it are going to be a little different than how the exaltation is described in Vedic astrology or Western astrology. But the same proponents, or rather the original components of that, come out of Kemetic astrology. And therefore, the Swadhisthana chakra, the Benu chakra, deals with kingship or a certain kind of rulership or control of the self. Other qualities of the Benu chakra, dealing with affection and delusion, deals with the fact that sex can delude you, right? Sex can be blinding. You can misperceive that something is there that it shouldn't be, and that causes what? An influence on your self-esteem. It can cause toxicity in you when you think that something or the relationship isn't what it is. We're moving on to the Yabti chakra, the solar plexus chakra, or the manipulative chakra with the planet Mars. Mars is associated with the East, associated with sunrise, that rebirth energy, that assertive energy is associated with fighting. It is called Sebach Yabti or Sebach Yabti Chapet. It is also called Heru Desher, the red Heru, signifying the warrior, the fighter. But of course, the perspective of Mars in an African perspective has a little bit more of a nurturing quality, because what are you going to war? Who are you fighting for? It's usually fighting for the nation, fighting for the community. So you see this deep relationship between the moon and Mars in Kemetic astrology and African astrology, because you also see the same thing in the Bantu cosmology. You also see the same thing in the Aten cosmology. This deep relationship, and how that correlates with the chakras is a deep relationship between the manipulative chakra and the Ajna chakra, which you're not going to really hear about in modern spirituality. And that connection speaks more to wisdom governing martial activity. We see it in Taoism. We see a little bit of it in some of the yogic stories, but we see more of it in the Black ancestral traditions, where this concept of fighting and going to arms and defending something is always guided by wisdom, is always guided by cycles, is always guided by the elder. So one of the problems we hear from certain so-called gurus is they will say the manipulative chakra is the problem in the world. That is one of the negative qualities of the Yabti chakra. It's delusion again, it's fear, it's sadness, it's jealousy, people trying to take other people's stuff. But in a holistic and balanced society, where you would not be taking that action without wisdom. And so the ancients made sure that they paired that together. That's why in some system of the planetary chakra model in ancient times, you will see them place Jupiter at the manipulative chakra instead of Mars. You will see people place the sun. That's why they call it the solar plexus. They will place the sun at the manipulative chakra. And that thinking from a Black ancestral perspective is that the king, the leader, still has to answer to the ancestors, still has to answer to his advisors. There's always going to be some kind of guidance. And this idea of guidance gets messed up or gets perverted in the Indo-European and the Eurocentric perspective because individuality is the highest value due to the history of being exploited. Right? You look into the history of Europe, and feudalism is constant exploitation. That's why the seeds of America is built on asserting your rights, asserting your freedom. This is the chakra that is going to do that. Right? So that's why entrepreneurship is held as a high value in American society, which is entrepreneurship is going to be driven by this Yabti chakra. Right? And it's held as something great so that you do not have to be exploited, right? In the concept of feudalism or the concept of capitalism, where once again, that is not going to happen in a Black ancestral tradition because the concept of being exploited by others is not going to really be the case, or at least to this degree that we see it today. Things are going to be more focused on community and protecting those community assets. You're not going to see an exploitative model because there's a value of human life and the value of people, the connection to the moon, the nurturing quality, right? To make it plain and see how this spiritual qualities manifest on earth. And the example that we gave in the last episode, right? What makes the Yabti chakra assert itself, protect itself? Well, when Mars moves into Cancer as it is now, the Sebach transits into a sign, right? The Aurabau, the chakra, Yabti, takes that energy signature, it processes it, and then sends that energy to the celiac plexus, sends that energy to the adrenal glands, sends that energy to the pancreas gland, right? One of the reasons why you see people who have strong Aries energy, right? This sustained effort and confidence, they just kind of like, they don't run out of energy. They keep pushing, is because of the insulin that is being produced from the pancreas in their body that is pushing that chakra. This is not just some mystical, abstract, esoteric thing. We will break that. We will cut that because that is not what we do from a Black ancestral perspective. Let other people be dwelling in mysticism and all of this stuff. Because the reality is, part of it is psychological and spiritual warfare. Keep you thinking that this thing is over here in the ethereal part, when even in your body is registering what is happening and acting, even if you don't know it. Right? Whether you like it or not, when Mars is transited in Cancer, you're going to produce more adrenaline, or cortisol, and assertiveness or anger regarding the situation, wherever that is in your chart. You're not going to get away from it. And when you listen to certain astrologers, right, in the Vedic tradition, they will tell you, Mars is transiting the sign, you got to watch your anger. You got to do, this is one of the reasons why they, in the Vedic tradition, talk about having a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet to try to circumvent what they are calling anger. We don't do that here, right? Because we understand that meat eating is not separate from spirituality from a Black ancestral perspective. Check out our video on the Glad Diet where my wife, Basra, goes deep into it. We understand that spirituality and eating meat are not separated, but we also understand that modern spirituality misinterprets the signals of the Yabti chakra by always saying that it is anger, when it might just be a readiness to meet the confrontational force, a readiness to lay down the boundary, which is what the Yabti energy is there for, to lay down the boundary. Don't misinterpret your energetic push to lay down a boundary with anger and then be guilt tripped over it, right? There are certain people who are sent here to lay down boundaries. The warriors, the spiritual police officers, right? The children of Sekhmet, right? The children of Ma'ahes, the children of Heru Behudet, the children of Set, who are sent here to lay down those boundaries for protection. right? Of course, that energy can go the wrong way. This is where you start getting into, the chakras being unbalanced. Different conversation, right? But many of us have to own that energy anyway, because in modern spirituality, you're guilt tripped into you're a bad person if you manifested this. No, the Mars is transited my first house. My adrenal glands are pumping. I'm feeling great. I got to go off and fight. And you're telling me I'm a bad person? No, no, not according to Sekhmet. Not according to Heru Behudet, right? Not according to your destiny that you've been laid out to go lay that boundary and protect that person. Moving on to the heart chakra, or the Khema chakra, associated with the planet Jupiter, Khema. Jupiter has many different names in Kemet. You have Shema, you have Khema, you have Sheta, Heru, Ep.4 to be specific. Heru, who is the opener of the secret ways, the opener of the hidden ways, the planet that opens up the psychic ways, the spiritual way, right? It is a planet of the south. You'll see that Mercury is a planet of the north in Kemet, and that Jupiter is a planet of the south, right? And when we hear the concept of the south, in Kemetic tradition, it's talking about the ancestors, it's talking about kingship, it's talking about rulership, and that is why it is at the heart chakra. Modern spirituality does not equate the heart chakra with any particular leadership. It over-emotionalizes the chakra, right? It expresses it in a way that we say creates this passivity that can lead to exploitation and victimization, right? Or codependency. It does not The chakra itself does not speak of a confidence or a certain comfortability within yourself, right? Which it should, at least from a Black ancestral perspective. So the qualities of this chakra are leadership, bravery, confidence, tradition, and law, right? Khema means container of the law, right? When you see KH, right, it's also interchangeable with Ka, right? And the KH word itself, when you look into other languages, particularly the Semitic languages which descend from Kemet, you'll see that it means it is a container of something. And as we see in spirituality or astrology, that Jupiter is said to be a planet of wisdom, right? From a Kemetic perspective, that means that it is the container of Ma'at, the container of Ma'at, the container of order, because it is that wisdom which will help you. So the emotions associated with the heart chakra are compassion, our understanding, our lust, our anxiety, our indecision, our arrogance, our defiance, or incompetence, which we see in a lot of places, regardless of race, but definitely we see today, this incompetence with leadership, right? We see that. This is a part of that person having an issue with their Khema chakra, their heart chakra, from a Black ancestral perspective. And the heart chakra's role in understanding and compassion reflects the leader's need to uphold justice and tradition, right? Ensuring that the community remains balanced and stable. These politicians don't be listening to us. We're about to go vote for people who promise things, who say things, who really don't back things up, right? And you say, well, are they just not listening to us? And what is the first thing that people usually say? They don't care. They don't have any compassion, right? That is not the sign of a true leader, at least from a Black ancestral perspective. Moving on to the Sebach chakra, the throat chakra, with the planet Mercury. The Kemetic qualities are communication, truth, fertility, intelligence, and even lie. And the purpose of this chakra is very similar to what you see with the Vishuddha chakra in the Hindu tradition, where it is a bridge. Your words are a bridge between the spiritual and the physical world. And what we mean by bridging the spiritual and physical world, we mean that chanting at a certain frequency, right, move certain molecules, which then manifests and have an effect on physical reality. Western science calls this kymatics. And we see this even with the experimentations on water, where these words, these intentions influence physical reality, influence physical matrices. So this chakra, the Sebach chakra, is responsible for doing that. And the planet Mercury in your chart is responsible. But as I said earlier, Mercury, from a Kemetic perspective, also deals with the north. And in the north is where we saw a lot of the foreign invasions take place, right? Mercury is a planet associated with the god Set. And that's why you see the Eurasians that invade often has Set as their so-called god, right? And what we see even now in Eurocentric culture and philosophy and behaviors is what? A lot of lies and deceit, right? The negative aspect of the planet Mercury, the cunning and the deception. which was already talked about in Kemetic astrology, Kemetic Kushite astrology, thousands upon thousands of years ago, right? So you don't often hear fertility when you talk about Mercury. From a Kemetic perspective, even the word Sebach, which is related to the planet Mercury, also deals with concepts of being pregnant, concepts of creating. They're talking about the deep understanding about how your thoughts can manifest and create reality, how your speech have the power to grow ideas, create alliances, and resolve conflict within the community, right? The so-called diplomacy that we hear about that is aligned with traditional astrology approach to Mercury. So we move on to the Ya chakra, governed by Ya, right? This so-called third eye chakra. Now, it's very important to understand that in the Hindu tradition, the Ajna chakra is associated with wisdom. We need to understand that the fact that it's called the Ajna chakra actually means no wisdom. Jhana means wisdom. A means to negate something. So from that perspective, they're telling you something that's very different from a Kemetic perspective. The Kemetic qualities are intuition, insight, fertility, growth, and wisdom. But wisdom is special from this perspective because it is wisdom that is dealing with your enlightened ancestors. It's not just your own individual wisdom that you've cultivated, that you come back with, but it's also dealing with the Eaku, the ancestors, speaking to you, guiding you, right? Because wisdom itself is also culture. So it's not just also talking about the enlightened ancestors, it's also talking about these qualified elders. And we need to say qualified for a reason, because we, as I said earlier, we have to innovate these chakras, innovate these planets into an understanding today. And many people who are considered or quote unquote elders are not elders. We call them olders. We have a funny saying around here. We say that person's older but not an elder, right? They may be in their 60s, 70s, but they clearly, you can see that they're spiritually immature. You can clearly see that they're not a beacon of wisdom at all. They're not elders according to the African perspective, even if they demand or expect that kind of respect and authority, even though they didn't put in the work to get it. So this intuition, the stories, the oral histories that are told by the elders that are passed down in oral traditions, all are related to this Ya chakra, or what is called the Ajna chakra, or the third eye chakra. And last, we have the Aten chakra, or what is called the crown chakra, associated with the sun, right? The pictures that you see of Ra. And as we said, this is connected to your Ka, right? From a Kemetic perspective, connected to your Ori Inu from the perspective, and connected to your Kra from the Ka perspective. Deals with your destiny. And the wisdom that is given to you that is associated with the crown chakra comes directly from the Ka, the deity that's overseeing your destiny. And that's why in the Hindu tradition, they will talk about the crown spiritual connection, right? And this bliss that it is speaking about from an African perspective is the enjoyment, the pleasure that comes from when you are aligned, when you purify and are aligned with your Ka and your destiny. So wisdom and enlightenment comes from connecting with both the heavens and the ancestors. So there is no enlightenment for us without the ancestors, without your, and we're talking about your higher ancestors, just your sainted ancestors. So when people try to eliminate race and ethnicity from spirituality and then propose it as some type of higher moral evolved being, you must question that and understand that that has never happened in the history of humanity until 500 years ago, might even say 180 years ago. The world has always acknowledged regions, clans, where you're from. That has always been the basis, because even the Interu, the gods, the spirits are a part of that land and that environment in which your blood has been molded and brought up in. It's always been that way, and it will always be that way. And think about the delusion of people preaching this nonsense that you need to disregard race and it doesn't matter. Right? When we still live in a world today, at this very moment, you cannot go outside and get food without someone mentioning, I'm going to go get Chinese food. I'm going to go get Italian food. I'm going to go get Ethiopian. Hey, you guys want to eat Ethiopian tonight? So when people start preaching about so-called Kemetic wisdom and they masquerade saying this law of Osiris, this law of Anubis, or this law of Osiris is about you being one with all and transcending your tribalism, that is not African. Because there's only been one group of people who have said for you to transcend your race on this planet regarding being spiritual, regarding being a higher moral being. And that is what is taking place in the Western Esoteric traditions. And if you want to follow that, then you go ahead and follow that. But do not say that that is the standard of what our Kemetic ancestors said, because they were very clear and all African traditions very clear about the involvement of blood, the involvement of ethnicity and culture inside of your spirituality. As we wrap this episode up for this presentation of the Kemetic Chakras, all 7 from a Black ancestral perspective. We also like to thank those of our supporters for their patience. We were alerted when we first, started that people wanted meditations, and it's just been a challenge to get it out because it's more important to have some level of our philosophy out before we release meditation. Not all of our philosophy, but a good amount of it, because meditation is often posited as something that is absolutely good. And that's really not the case. There are many dangers to meditation, some of which is that you are dealing with neuroplasticity. You're changing your brain, you're changing your nervous system. And if the thoughts, ideas, the rhythms are not correct, it can cause a lot of problems in your life. When I say a lot of problems, just briefly, something as simple as norepinephrine. When we're taught from modern spirituality, this concept of being at peace, and make sure you're at peace, understand all those peaceful meditations that you're doing to be calm. And I'm not saying it's not essential, especially living here in America, living in the Western world where there's so much antagonism in the environment, but this excessive meditating for peace will eventually turn off your norepinephrine, turn off your adrenaline. So when it's time to defend yourself, when it's time to put a boundary out, you won't have even the thoughts or the energetics or the natural response to do so. Then you may go on to even reason and rationalize that you're actually at peace, when really is that you're incapable of producing the neurotransmitters, the hormones, the energetics to even lay out a boundary in the first place. It's a real tricky cognitive dissonance that we will go into talking about another time. So with ending, we want to talk about 2025 and talk specifically to our supporters. We really appreciate the support that we've gotten. We've also got word from our supporters. We've seen it ourselves. Our ancestors have spoke on it, and also astrology has spoken on it, that we have a lot of copycats, people who are copying our music, our rhythm. They're even copying our images. We're seeing people who are taking our logo with the zodiac signs in the circle and putting their own planetary symbols in it, or just putting it in their iconography, in their pictures they post on Instagram. And we are happy to be an inspiration, to be an innovator. We knew that we would do that. And we're also happy to be a reference point. It's been a year that we've even been on social media presenting our work, so it is definitely humbling, and we're very thankful for it. But there's a difference between someone being inspired and someone copycatting, or from a spiritual perspective, being a vampire, right? In the back watching, and then going out and changing things to attempt to compete. For example, you'll find that all of a sudden people are talking about Sun and Leo. After our episode 1 of Kemetic Astrology of this series, where we talked about Sun and Leo, multiple cultures, you watch people's videos, multiple people now, bringing up Sun and Leo coincidentally, right? People who've been following Western astrology for years, that their own followers are confused when they now all of a sudden want to talk about Leo and Magha and sidereal astrology all of a sudden. So to our supporters, just watch these people, understand what Black ancestral traditions are, understand what our branding is and the authenticness of our approach. We're not just coloring European mysticism black, or for others who they might color this part black, keep this part this. We're not doing any of that. It's just important to know that is what's coming for 2025. And to those copycats, you know who you are. We see you. So be on the lookout for these copycats, these energetic and spiritual vampires lying in wait to try to copy our stuff. And understand that a lot of them have resumes that span, some of them 50 years. So a lot of their terminology, a lot of the things that they say, there's already a record of it. So when you hear them all of a sudden talking about ages and spirituality and 12 signs and superimposing Kemetic names on it, and then saying that this is Kemetic astrology, no. So be out on the lookout for that. And we, once again, thank you for your support, and see you on the next video.